Welcome, fellow investigators, to this explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? For decades, the Bermuda Triangle has been sold to us as this terrifying paranormal vortex. I mean, we've all heard the wild stories: vanishing ships, abducted airplanes, compasses spinning out of control. But today, we're putting on our forensic investigator hats. We're going to look right past the pop culture mythology and rely strictly on verifiable data, meteorological records, and actual professional maritime investigations.
Here is our investigative docket for today. We'll be opening the cold case, looking at media sensationalism and myth-making, checking the statistical reality and facts, exploring verifiable environmental hazards, analyzing human error, and finally closing the book on this manufactured mystery.
All right, part 1. Opening the cold case and establishing the scene. Now, what's really wild to think about here is the sheer size of this area. It spans over 1 million square miles of some of the absolute most heavily traveled ocean on Earth. Also known as the Devil's Triangle, this region in the North Atlantic is roughly bounded by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. When you actually look at it laid out like this, you realize pretty quickly that this isn't some isolated, mysterious little cove. It's a massive, incredibly busy thoroughfare for both commercial and recreational traffic. And depending on which writer you ask, the area magically shrinks or expands anywhere from 1.3 to 3.9 million square kilometers. That right there is our very first clue that the boundaries of this so-called crime scene are highly subjective.
Moving on to part 2, media sensationalism and myth-making, the suspects.
So the myth actually began innocently enough, with vague newspaper articles, like this 1950 Associated Press piece, but man, it quickly spiraled completely out of control. A writer named Edward Van Winkle Jones wrote an article for the Miami Herald suggesting there were unusual disappearances, and that got distributed by the AP. It planted a seed in the public consciousness. People were just fascinated by the idea of an unsolved mystery right in their own backyard. And obviously, a few enterprising writers saw a golden opportunity to give the public exactly what they wanted.
This brilliantly illustrates how the false narrative evolved over time. It went from a scattered news report to a massive, highly profitable global phenomenon by the 1970s. In 1952, George X. Sand wrote a piece for Fate magazine that first laid out that familiar triangular boundary. Fast forward to 1964, and Vincent Gaddis drops an article in Argosy magazine, coining the term the Deadly Bermuda Triangle, claiming a clear pattern of strange events. Then by 1974, Charles Berlitz publishes a best-selling book that essentially cements the paranormal legend worldwide. The mystery was quite literally constructed layer by layer over a 20-year period.
Just notice the stark difference here between entertainment media pushing things like parallel universes and professional researchers who found absolutely zero verifiable evidence of the paranormal. Skeptical researchers have rightly pointed out that the paranormal is highly profitable. Sensationalist writers push these crazy theories about Atlantis, UFOs, and time warps, but when you look at the professional side, the United States Coast Guard, the Navy, serious meteorologists, they attribute every single incident to natural phenomena, human error, or just outright misinterpretation. Science doesn't have to answer questions about a magical triangle because the premise itself is fundamentally flawed.
Which brings us to part 3, statistical reality and facts, establishing the baseline.
Okay, so get this, 0. That is the Bermuda Triangle's rank on the Worldwide Fund for Nature's 2013 list of the 10 most dangerous shipping waters. Literally 0. In a comprehensive, data-driven study of the world's most perilous oceans, the Bermuda Triangle didn't even make the cut. Australian scientist Carl Kritzlinicki's actually confirmed that, on a percentage basis, the number of accidents in the Bermuda Triangle is exactly the same as anywhere else in the world, especially when you factor in the massive volume of traffic passing through it every single day.
Investigator Larry Cush's extensive 1975 research confirmed that disappearances here are totally proportional to any other busy ocean, which entirely busts the myth. Cush actually did the legwork. He went back to the original period newspapers and the actual meteorological records, and he found that writers like Berlitz were practicing incredibly sloppy research. They'd claim a ship disappeared in calm waters, but Cush would pull the real weather records and find that there was a massive tropical cyclone that day. He even found cases where writers claimed ships vanished mysteriously, while conveniently omitting the fact that those same ships safely returned to port a few days later. No way, right?
Let's look at part 4, verifiable environmental hazards and the physical evidence.
Our present exhibits A and B. First, we have a swift 6.6 feet per second Gulf Stream that can easily sweep away wreckage. Pair that with extreme Atlantic hurricane tracks that just so happen to perfectly overlap our so-called crime scene.
The Gulf Stream is basically a massive, rapid river flowing right within the ocean. If a small plane makes a water landing or a boat loses its engine, that current will swiftly carry the wreckage miles and miles away from its last reported position. That perfectly explains why no trace is often found. Furthermore, the area is historically prone to violent hurricanes. Before modern weather satellites came along, ships had almost zero warning before being swallowed whole by a massive storm.
Now, while the U.S. Geological Survey notes there haven't been any recent large releases here, science proves phenomena like methane hydrate bubbles can actually sink ships, no Atlantis technology required. Laboratory experiments in Australia have physically proven that bubbles from a sudden methane eruption can decrease the density of the water so drastically that a ship just loses its buoyancy and drops like a stone. While the USGS says this hasn't happened in the Triangle for about 15,000 years, it perfectly highlights how terrifying, completely natural phenomena are far more logical explanations for rapid sinking than, say, a parallel universe.
Section 5. Human Error and Navigation. The Autopsy. Let's dig into some specific incidents. Take the holy grail of triangle lore, the famous 1945 disappearance of Flight 19. It wasn't an alien abduction. Naval investigators attributed it to a tragic navigational error that led the planes to simply run out of fuel over the open ocean. 5 torpedo bombers vanished on a routine training flight. Entertainment writers love to claim the flight leader said the ocean doesn't look as it should, hinting at the supernatural. But official records show they just got disoriented. Compasses have natural magnetic variations, which trained navigators know, but confusion set in. They essentially flew in the wrong direction until their fuel tanks ran completely dry. Tragic? Absolutely. Paranormal? Not at all.
When we systematically analyze these famous cold cases side by side, every single supernatural claim dissolves right into verifiable human error or extreme environmental hazards. Take the Connemara IV in 1955. Writers claimed the crew vanished into thin air. The reality? The boat was completely empty, tied to a mooring, and simply got ripped out to sea by the sheer force of Hurricane Janet. Or the USS Cyclops in 1918, which was the greatest non-combat loss of life in U.S. Navy history. Writers called it a great mystery, but investigators noted the ship was carrying a full load of manganese ore. That's a cargo so incredibly dense, it highly likely caused a massive structural failure, literally breaking the ship apart in rough seas.
And finally, Section 6. The manufactured mystery solved. It's time for the verdict.
Even spooky incidents like the ghost ship Carol A. Deering were rigorously investigated by the FBI, and notably, it grounded off North Carolina. That is nowhere near the accepted triangle boundaries. This just brilliantly illustrates how desperate these writers were to build their myth. They would take an incident that happened hundreds of miles away, like off the coast of North Carolina, or in the case of the VA fog, off the coast of Texas, and just lazily lump it into the Bermuda Triangle just to pad their statistics.
The anatomy of this hoax is incredibly clear. Normal accidents were routinely repackaged, stripping away the actual weather context, all to sell magazines to a gullible public. It's a straightforward formula, really. You take the heavy maritime traffic, mix in the Gulf Stream and a few massive hurricanes, find a boat that sank, completely ignore the hurricane on the weather report, and then publish a paperback book claiming Atlantis did it. It was a cycle of misinformation built entirely on a lack of fact-checking.
If you really want the truth, follow the money. Lloyd's of London, the ultimate financial authority in marine insurance, doesn't even charge ships higher premiums to travel through this area. This proves the danger is entirely a mathematical illusion. When a British television program looked into this back in 1992, they simply went straight to the money. Insurance actuaries don't care about UFOs, they care about risk. And Lloyd's determined that proportionally, large numbers of ships do not sink there. The United States Coast Guard records completely back up this exact conclusion.
Fellow investigators, if sheer media sensationalism successfully created the Devil's Triangle out of thin air, we really have to leave this explainer asking ourselves, what other popular mysteries are out there right now blinding us to the objective facts? The Bermuda Triangle teaches us an incredibly valuable lesson about critical thinking. It shows us exactly how quickly human error and harsh nature can be painted over by a lucrative, compelling story. Always check the original sources, look at the actual weather report, and let the data guide you.